What is up, guys? In this video we're going to be going over scopes in JavaScript, because until now you may have noticed that when you create a variable or any kind of number that you cannot access it from everywhere. Sometimes they will be only accessible from certain blocks, and these are called scopes, but it's much easier explained if we just jump right into it. So the first thing we're going to do is create what they call a global variable. So we're going to go ahead and type in var example, and that's just going to equal hello. And this is considered a global variable because we've declared it at the top outside of all of the function blocks. We don't have any function blocks yet, but it's declared at the top and can be used by anything because that's the current scope. And right below we're going to create a function which is called do something as always. And now inside here we are going to go ahead and create a local variable. So for example, we're going to create var example2, and that's going to equal world. So now you're going to notice that this variable cannot be accessed outside of the function. Then we're going to go at the bottom and we're going to type in log, and we're going to log the example plus a space plus example2. And you will notice that this will not become highlighted because we cannot access it. In fact, if we go ahead and refresh the program, it's going to say example2 is not defined. Even if we call this function, you will still notice that example2 is not defined, even if we create it inside the function. This is because this was only created in the local area or the local block, which means it can only be accessed from within this function. If you want to make this globally accessible, you would have to go ahead and create a var example, add a pair of quotation marks, and then here all you have to do is change that, because we can access this variable because it is a global function now. And when we click on save, you'll notice it will say hello world, because first we create the global variable, then we change it with the do something function, and finally we can use it as the variable we want to. So let's just go back to what we had earlier. So the very basic rule about scoping is that wherever you declare the variable will be essentially very specific to the block you declare it in. So example2 should only be used in do something because that's how we declared it. It's a local variable, local to this block. And the global one can be used anywhere, so be very sparing on the global variables because in general you want things to be as specific as possible. But now let's also move on to the second keyword that they have, which is rather recent. It's called let, and let helps us with being a bit more specific on how we scope things. The definition of the let keyword is used for block scoping, while the var keyword is used for scoping in general. I don't know if you're going to use the let keyword so often in modern day programming. They've recently introduced that, and sometimes it's useful, sometimes it's not, but I think the var keyword should be enough to cover almost everything. But let's go for another example. So let's write if 1 is more than 0. We're going to create another statement, which is going to be this time a let variable. So let example2 equal code block inside if statement. Now we can go ahead and log the example2. Then let's also log the example2 outside of this if statement. So log example2. Now you'll notice because we used the let keyword, we were able to recreate this variable essentially, but this time under the circumstance that it is only specific to this block of code right here. So what you will get is a log of the example2 which has changed over here, but only for this block of code here. So let allows you to be a bit more specific with the scoping, in other words. And then you'll notice that the console log outside of it will still remain as world. So if we go ahead and click on save, of course I need to call the function. You'll notice that the code block inside the if statement was called with the same variable name of example2. And when we're outside of it, it goes back to being hello world. And another example of how you can use let is if you were to create custom blocks of code, which I've seen very rarely happen, but one day you might decide to do this. So let's type in let example. We can use the same variable name as this one over here without touching it. So this will be created only for this block of code. So we can write code block example1, and we're going to copy this, paste it right under, add a 2 and change this to 2. So we are still using the same variable names as above here without affecting the variable names down here. which is very good when you want to be specific. And let's go ahead, of course, and log those two statements. So we're going to do console log, and finally, let's remove the one from there. So now if we go ahead and click on run, you'll notice that we will change example and example2 to different strings as we have defined inside this custom code block. And again, this can be very good if you want to be more specific with your code, but I don't think you will work with that too much. The var keyword should be more than sufficient for most of your programming. But in case you really want to be specific, or you have to use the same keyword, or you want to change a variable only for one very specific block, you can always use the let keyword, because as you can see right there, it helps you with scoping. And to sum it up, scoping just has to do with where you declare the variable, such as if a local variable will be declared inside a block of code or a function, it can only be accessed inside there. Otherwise, if you create a global variable, you'll be able to use it throughout your whole script in general. But of course, you need to play around with these things to understand where you can reach a variable and where you can't. I think the increment counter is always a good way to start, because you have to define a number at the top, and then you need to change that number inside here each time, of course. But otherwise, that's actually all I wanted to cover in this video. If you have any questions, you're more than welcome to leave them in the comment section below, and I'll do my best to answer them. With that being said, I'll see you guys in the next video.